I'm Chris Hurst, author of No Bullshit Leadership. I'm delighted today to be joined in this episode by Colonel Lucy Giles. She's the first woman to take on the prestigious role of being president of the Army Officer Selection Board, which, as the name suggests, makes her responsible for officer selection in the British Army. And previously, she was the first female college commander in the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst's 200-year history. She has served in over 20 countries, including South Africa, Bosnia, East Timor, and Sierra Leone. And for our UK listeners, she's also appeared on the iconic Radio 4 programme Desert Island Discs, where, and in a choice that clinched it for me, her first record was by Metallica. Colonel Lucy Giles, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. It's a delight to be here on No Bullshit Leadership.
What's the best decision you've ever made?
To stay in the army when I was about to go because somebody was making my life a bit challenging. So I was going to leave and run away from it, and I faced it head on. And I think that's the best decision.
And what was that? What was the way you persuaded yourself? How did you come to that decision? Did you?
Because I didn't want anybody else to feel like I did under that style of leadership. So the only way I could address it is to face it head on and challenge it. And I'm the one now as a full colonel in the British Army, and he's left.
Fantastic. There you go. Good. I like that. And the hardest decision you've ever made? Maybe it was the same one.
Well, the hardest decision, I think, is removing somebody from the commissioning course, because you know that you were taking their future away from them that they had visualized. But actually, it was an easy decision because the metrics that we used were reasonably, we were on firm moral grounds. Yes. But it still doesn't make those conversations easy with the individuals.
Yeah. So I mean that's quite a nice segue then. If we get into sort of the main body of the interview, Sandhurst's motto is "Serve to Lead." What does that mean to you?
I think serve to lead is a good way of encapsulating the role of the army officer in the modern age. And actually it has a link to our past as well as our future as well. So it's about that selfless commitment. It's about being able to lead your people, engender trust, and focus on something with purpose, which is it goes back to the quick fire round about being purposeful as a leadership style. So serve to lead is the bedrock, and I think it's the moral compass that keeps us heading in the right direction as the officer corps. Has that always been
Sandhurst's motto? Because it feels quite modern. I mean, that's a sort of modern. Sandhurst being 200 years old, was that its motto 200 years ago? Do you know?
I'm not sure where it actually started from, to be honest. I think it was. I don't think it was there when they had young men, and it was there, and they were 15-year-old boys, 16-year-old boys at the time that would be coming into the academy rather than buying their commissions. But I think it must have been introduced at a later time. Actually, I think it's pre-World War One though, so it's in that.
So it's okay. And will you tell us a little bit about your current role? So what does your current role entail?
Well, my current role is selecting my current role is assessing and selecting our future leaders in the British Army. But interesting, the nuance is that we're looking to people as to whether they can be trained to be an army officer, not necessarily the finished product. So the unique thing about being at the Army Officer Selection Board is we capture observed evidence from what we see, what we hear, and some of the other testing we do. We pull that together to understand where people are at that moment in time, but then we juxtapose it with a bit of their background to understand where their potential could be in the future. Whether if something we're seeing is inherent and you can't do much with somebody who's got perhaps a brain that's hardwired in a certain way, or a character that's already formed that can't be developed. So we look for all of that, and And my role is to preside over all of the types of boarding that we do.
Very good. And what drives you? Do you feel like you're a role model in the army?
Well, I had a
or
moment
outside of the army as well, by the way. I mean, not just in the army.
Well, two parts to that, really. The first one in the army, I never thought of myself as a role model because I saw myself as being the same as everybody else when I was growing up through, even though as a female in the army, you're in a minority. But it was when I was at Sandhurst and I was queuing for my boots, I was next to some girls in the queue. They both were looking at each other, giggling in a way, and asked me if I was the new college commander. And I said, yes, I am. And they were very excited because they hadn't seen anyone in my rank or doing this kind of role. And actually, if you think about it from their perspective, it was quite a big deal. From me, it didn't seem a big deal at all. But I realized then it was a bit of a light bulb moment that no matter what I really wanted to do, I think I had a responsibility to champion that group and show what can be achieved if you put your mind to it, and if it's something that you really want.
And I mean, this is my, as an outsider, my perception is that leadership in the army is unlike any other career, certainly a career outside of the military, where leadership can be literally a matter of life or death. What does it feel like to know that lives might depend on the decisions you take?
Well, you take your responsibility as a leader or a commander or a manager, however you want to view your role. Mm-hmm. But you take those responsibilities in the context in which you're working really seriously. Now, we're in this interesting, I think, role where you are training really hard to do something that you hope you never do, because if we train to the maximum and to the worst case scenario, which is war fighting, kinetic action, bombs and bullets, with the intention of destroying an enemy, the Queen's enemy. But you obviously don't want to be doing that, because that means there's been a serious problem out there going on. But in the context in which I've been working in my career, if you look at, I did 3 tours of Bosnia, I did Sierra Leone, East Timor, and I was working in Northern Ireland, which was there in a high threat environment, and other places, Afghanistan and Iraq in certain roles. You have that constant threat that somebody is trying to kill you, or that you are in an environment in which you are a legitimate target according to according to the rule of law. So when you are leading people in that context, you are very mindful that you are putting them in harm's way, or you are potentially in harm's way yourself, which is why the motto "Serve to Lead" is a good reminder for you to constantly refer back to make sure that you do the best you can to mitigate that and keep people out of harm's way, whether that be in making sure the training is correct, maybe making sure the drills are adhered to. So that's how I would answer that one. It is what drives me is the sense of purpose. What drives me is doing the right thing, and what drives me is looking after my soldiers, my men and women that I would be commanding in those contexts. And it's not just obviously war fighting. There's a whole host of other areas there. So when I was in Cumbria and did the foot and mouth support to the then DEFRA who were leading that, we, if we didn't get our PPE right, we were putting our people in harm's way. So you can see it in across the spectrum of contexts.
And do you think there are some universal principles of leadership across time or across jobs?
I think there are, and I think it ranges from having a growth mindset and curiosity, and never stop learning, that kind of approach. There are, I think that the minute you start putting attributes to it, it becomes tricky, because
yes,
it depends on the context in which you're working, really, as to what you're going to use.
A question I get asked quite often is about being liked. Maybe that's good. Jokes aside, but do you think it's necessary to be liked to be a leader?
That's such a good question. And I think the answer is no, you don't need to be liked, but I think it helps.
Yeah, yes,
So,
I agree.
And therefore, if you are, because sometimes you've got to make tough decisions, and people will respect you for taking a particular stance, but they won't if you can be the nicest person in the, can be quite jovial, great to get on with, but if you can't do your core, but if you're not competent, if you can't behave in a certain way, then you'll lose the respect. So, and I think some people do find that balance quite tricky, especially in other sectors, maybe where they are transitioning from one level of leadership to another without any kind of intervention.
So no, it's not necessary to be liked. Yes, it is necessary to be respected
and competent.
And competent. Yes,
because you are competent.
Yes, definitely to that. And has leadership, or the required leadership style in the army, evolved over the time you've been there?
I think it has, and the reason is we started in 2015. We codified our leadership methods, way of doing business, ethos, whatever you want to call it, in a leadership doctrine, how we do leadership. But up until that point, we were quite complacent, even arrogant, that because we're in the army, of course we know leadership, because we got Slim, Montgomery, etc. So of course we're brilliant, but nobody could articulate why, or why people perceive it to be brilliant or whatever. And so it was sort of left in an abyss, and because I was working behind the scenes a little bit, it took literally years to get to the point where we could have a physical booklet which could simply offer the guideline on how we needed to approach leadership, and it was therefore available to other organizations and sectors. And so what that looked like was framed along what leaders are, what leaders know, what leaders do, and then how they do it. And that simple framework therefore then can offer that journey, leadership development journey, across the breadth of the army, whether you're a soldier or you're a general. So it has evolved, and we're much better at it, at getting at it, I think.
Okay. Do you think that women lead differently to men? I mean, I know, for example, there's been a lot of debate during COVID, hasn't there, about whether or not countries with women in charge have done a better job of it than countries with men in charge. Do you think that? Yeah. Do you think women lead differently, at least, let's say?
I think there's a biology that means that we think differently, or arguably think differently, because our hormones are triggered differently, our emotional state is different, and as it is different for a male brain, or whatever, if you want to look at it through that prism. And I do think that therefore that will bring different strengths to your leadership style when you need to draw upon them. So do they lead differently? Possibly. But that's got to be a good thing, I think, to be able to show, that's why diversity is such an important theme throughout any organization, least of all the army. If you've got people who bring something to the party because they think a little bit differently, and it may be because of they have a different ethnicity, a different faith, different upbringing, different educational background, blah, 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 different gender. But the point is that they've come from a different thinking space, and therefore they can bring something to the party. So do men and women lead differently? Possibly, but men and men lead differently. It depends on the person in the background.
Yes, yes. So let's talk about leadership a little bit more then. So can you tell us, you've served, I think, in more than 20 countries around the world. Can you tell us about one or more of the most difficult decisions you've had to take whilst sort of in the field, so to speak?
I remember when I was in Sierra Leone, and the context here is that if I just, sorry, I'll pause there 2 secs because of the, it's the headphone thing again. Hang on, sorry. 2 secs.
It's okay, don't worry, it's all right, don't worry.
Because it can be quite distracting when it keeps switching.
Yeah.
But I'll just carry on anyway. It doesn't seem to be picking it up again.
Do you want me to ask the question again? Why don't I ask you the question again? Then it might be an easier edit for the guys. Okay. So can you tell us about one of the most difficult leadership decisions you've had to take whilst actually in the field or in combat?
Well, when I was deployed to Sierra Leone, and the context here is that, you know, a young corporal chef in the Sierra Leonean army had decided to form a coup against the then government. And part of the reasons for doing that is, and one of the methods they used was to cut people's limbs off and hands off, because the slogan for the government was, you have the world in your hands, or you have work in your hands. So they made the connection that if they did long sleeves or short sleeves on the individuals in their homes, that was okay. I mean, and they got young children to do the work. It was pretty appalling to understand what the experiences that the Sierra Leoneans had been going through. So to go there into that mix at a time where there was uproar in the international community was fascinating. And I went to one of the amputee camps, and part of my role in that space was to show people why we were here. Why was the British Army getting involved, you know, in trying to bring peace to that area or to that sector? Why were we needed? And then when you visually see these people with such disabilities, but interestingly a very vibrant human spirit, it does affect you, and it has lasting impressions. So one of the situations I found myself was, I was in the amputee camp. had a team with me, and unfortunately somebody had died in the camp, and they wanted to remove the body, and because this was a Muslim number of people there, they were needed to be buried within a certain time frame and in a certain way. And the problem is that morally I wanted to help them, you know, because you want to get involved and support them, but it was just absolutely verboten as part of our mission that was out there. So that was the problem I found, is that you know, I wanted to be able to help, but that was not part of my remit. But we got round it by linking somebody else up and finding some money from somewhere to be able to allow this burial to happen in an appropriate manner for this elderly gentleman who died of natural causes there. And so you know, the effect was achieved eventually, but you feel a bit impotent to help when you're out there on the ground and they're begging you to do something.
Yeah, I can imagine, or at least try to imagine. Goodness. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that always amazes me is how much authority the military appear to give to people at such a relatively young age. So, you know, for example, myself, by the time I'd left university, I was sort of 24, and I got, you know, for the next 18 months, I kind of answered the phone and, you know, I don't know, sat and took notes in meetings. Whereas, you know, in the army, people at 24 can be given really quite large degrees of authority. I mean, why do you think that we underestimate the capabilities of young people, or rather the army get it right?
I don't know, actually. You're right. I mean, I'm 25 years old. I was commanding a troop of 72 in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and you know, having, you know, 70 men, most of them are older than me, and well, a few of them younger, obviously, but and you're there and they're looking to you for decision making and leadership, etc. You know, what's Troopy going to ask us to do next? So you're absolutely right. But I think some of this comes down to what we need, and we know that the brain still is forming until about 25, 26 years old, and in that space people take more risks. So maybe it is that at that younger age you are more likely to take risks, and this kind of lifestyle and vocation appeals. I'm possibly there. I might be doing a bit of psychopop there, but you know, if you look at amazing entrepreneurs, it's done in the, you know, it doesn't happen at 50, unfortunately for me.
No.
But it's, you know, the entrepreneurial skills and that innovation comes usually at an earlier age, because your brain's still sparking.
Yes. Well, I mean, I have to say, I do think about that quite a lot, because I don't think my experience or our organization is different to any others. I mean, people go to university and they typically get a job, and they, broadly speaking, get put at the bottom of the organization and have to work their way up. Whereas in military of all the different services, people are given a lot of authority at a young age, and to me that's proof that people, you know, that people can take an awful lot more authority and responsibility at a younger age than I think society often expects.
I think you're absolutely right, and we do take them through, both for the soldiers and for the officers. We do take them through quite a rigorous selection. And then the training intervention that we have is pretty rigorous, and we deliberately create a pressurized environments for people to then find themselves and be challenged. So I think we set people up for success. I'm not sure we did it as well in the past, but I think we've got it right, getting it right now and into the future.
I also wonder whether that's because, almost by definition, the military has a far more structured, let's say, view on leadership and how to create leaders. I mean, that's been at least part of your job it's your job now, and you've been your job in the past. Whereas I think a lot of organizations, it's a bit more laissez-faire, if you see what I mean. I mean, people sort of come in and sink or swim.
Yeah, I mean, if you take, for example, the regular commissioning course, it's 44 weeks long for a regular officer. And if you look at it from the outside in, you'll just think, oh, it's just the basic infantry course. Well, actually, it's not. It's a leadership development course in which military training and academic study and physical development are all interwoven, and we create the opportunities for people to be challenged, to find themselves, to work in a team, to and to achieve goals that they didn't think they could. So we, with various tools, frameworks for thinking, communication methods, I mean, it's all, and we just do it continuously. We build up, and at the heart of it is building the team. That's the heart of it, and you can, and I think that's a successful product of what we do at Sandhurst. And I did that for 3.5 years. You know, commissioned 2,000 people under my watch, and so, and I'm quite proud that I've been able to help, because it was a reasonably new course when I went through. We changed our approach, so I was really pleased to continue to develop that and to try and get the right people we needed at the end of it. So I think you're right. The structure really helps, but it's creating those conditions in order for people to learn about themselves, I think. And that's where I have maybe a bit of an issue with the experience I've had on doing leadership courses. You know, can you teach leadership? Well, I don't think you can. I think you can experience good leadership and bad leadership. And the only way you're going to do that is by being in an environment in which that is felt. And the only, you know, you manage an organization until something goes wrong, and then you lead it through challenge. So you have to have pressure applied in order to get those that leadership out of people. You know, it's the VC winner who's the private soldier who's gone in 3 times to rescue someone. You know, you can't test that. You've got to experience, or you've got to provide the environment in order for people.
Yes, there's only certain things you can learn or explore in a classroom. Some things you've got to go out there and experience.
Well, I mean, absolutely. I've been very privileged to be part of some of the leadership development of other organisations. So I've gone in and offered a viewpoint or challenged them or whatever it is. There's still 200 people sitting in chairs in front of you. I'm not sure that that's the insight that I may give is interesting for sure, possibly, maybe a tiny bit anyway.
I'm sure it is.
But the real, if there was a clean piece of paper and I can go off and do it, I would be taking people out and using the experiences and the training that we've developed and honed over many years, and putting that in a more context.
So I'm going to ask you a question now that is a question that I would hate to ask, because it would mean me talking about myself. But so what would you say are the particular skills or talents that have enabled you to be so successful within the army? I mean, particularly given the extra challenges you faced as a woman, often the only woman, presumably, in the room.
Well, I think there was a point in my career where it became not about me, but it became about and my ambition, but about being focused on what made me happy and what made me feel relevant and what the purpose of the organisation was, and did the two align? And when I recognised that it did, I took the pressure off me to try and conform to be something different, so that I could meet what the leadership in the army should be like, or what a commander should be like. I just became more comfortable in my own skin and more happy in my own skin. And do you know what? Blow it. I don't care what everybody else thinks. I'm driven by, as I mentioned earlier, by the sense of purpose and selfless commitment, looking after our soldiers, all of that kind of stuff, and doing the right thing. So when you take that self-induced pressure, particularly ambition, off, it gives you so much more capacity to think outside the box, be more relaxed about life choices outside of the work environment, and you just become a much more relaxed person, I think. And that happened for me having had the children, I think. And when I promoted to lieutenant colonel, because I thought, right, well, I've made lieutenant colonel, that's great, but I've not done it at any cost. I've done it because and my kids are happy. Still love my husband, and life's not bad. And interestingly, Chris, that's when a lot of opportunities and doors opened.
Yes.
And here I am having this conversation with your good self, for example.
Yes,
and,
the pinnacle, no doubt, the pinnacle of your career.
Yeah, but it's cute, talking and reflecting on like a career, and actually, it's not just so much how the career in the army, but it's also the how Lucy's developed. Not Colonel Lucy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's why it's, and I think that's probably would be the top tip, is just to relax a bit more about life and enjoy the moments and be really clear on what makes you happy and tick and motivated, and the rest fall out, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that is fantastic advice for anybody, I think, at any stage in their life and within any organization. And so what would you, people talk a lot about, when we think about people's careers, when we think about our own careers, we think about strengths and weaknesses. Okay, so maybe we organizations, I'm sure the army do it as well, have lots of ways of giving people feedback and all that kind of stuff. But do you think we as individuals are better off emphasizing and understanding our strengths and saying, well, that's what I'm really good at, or minimizing and trying to deal with our weaknesses?
Strengths all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, we can expend, because what I've noticed is we do tend to focus on weaknesses as though they're, and it's framed often in a negative way. And of course, then
even the question is negative, right? Because weaknesses sounds like it, yes.
Which is why, interestingly, I never use it. I always say these are the areas I think you could develop, rather than, because I know that with intervention they can become better than they are at the moment. For example, somebody may not be confident speaking in front of a group of people. Well, there are courses we can do to help with that, or put them people in different situations. So, and what that means is we're not capitalizing on the strengths. So, why put somebody who is fantastic at mathematics and computers and all that sort, why put them, in a job that's nothing to do with computers? And I think, it's just pointless. So, but really understanding strengths, it is, I think, a critical part of any leadership journey. And it's not just how you see yourself; it's how other people see you as well, and that needs to come from different directions. I don't know what it's like in your organisation or your experience, Chris, but we work quite top down and we're hierarchical. So my report is written on by the person who I work for. There's no input on how my colleagues view me or how my subordinates view me, unless I ask for it. And because I'm that kind of person, I do, but not everybody does, which means they are blind to a significant part of that, that compass, if you like. You're only looking at that bit.
Well, it's a fascinating conversation because of course the army. I mean, the armies are the archetypal hierarchical organizations, right? I mean, that's where hierarchies in every other organization effectively arose from. I mean, in that military structure. And I mean, one of the questions I was going to ask you actually was the extent to which is a sort of a variation on that observation, the extent to which in the modern army, what is the balance between discipline and consensus in terms of how you get done what needs to be done?
Well, there's a time and a place for consultation. There's a time and place to get on with it and follow orders. And it just depends on the situation. I think if you've got if I've got a really good idea, rather than imposing it, I will try and bring people with me. So I will float it out there. I'll be quite consultative. Will ask people's viewpoints. In fact, I literally have got, just behind this desk, I've got a project list that I've just sent out to the team and said, pick and choose what you think you can do within the time you've got and within the constraints that we're all working in at the moment. And so I know that they'll be wanting to, they're already buying into something by volunteering for it. Do you see what I mean? Rather than me telling them.
Yeah.
So there's a psychology there, which is quite interesting. But there is also a time where, and I wrote a note a week and a half ago, because the standards of reports that I was expecting were falling short of where they needed to be. So I had to send out a little bit of a reminder that this is what we expect. The purpose behind it is because these are candidates that need have really good feedback on how they can improve. And if we're a bit sloppy or taking shortcuts, that's not good enough. And so, and if you couldn't understand that, we can have a conversation and maybe you need to work somewhere else.
It sounds quite like working in advertising. I think. Who knew?
I know.
Actually, that's a good moment for pause. That's my home phone, so I'm just going to get rid of that. Everybody draw breath. Yeah, sorry, there we go.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah,
somebody once told me, I was having a conversation with him. He was a senior officer, and my phone went off, and I quickly I got flustered, and I said, I'm so sorry. I switched it off and tried to sit on it, and it kept bleeping, and I got all flummoxed. And he said, what you need to do is say, excuse me, I'm just going to answer this phone, and then answer the phone and then put it away, whatever, rather than worrying about it, because you never know quite who it is. So,
you never know who it might be.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I've adopted that, but
Well, in this day and age, it was probably the DHL man looking for our house. That's probably what it was.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I know what you mean.
Yes. So how do you? So we were talking before you came on about history and about the whether or not what we can learn as societies, what we can learn from history, but particularly what maybe we as leaders can learn from history. And again, the army has got a long and proud history. Does the army learn from leaders of the past, and does the army study, and is it effective at studying and learning lessons from the past?
Yeah, I think retrospective analysis of decision making and people's styles, how they manage to achieve what they want to do, both positive or maybe not so positive, has got to be a good thing, because it helps inform, it makes us complacent, because we're human beings, inevitably people will have come up with moral challenges or difficulties, and trying to see and learn how other people maybe would have taken on those challenges is quite interesting. Are we effective is a different question. And I think there was a German general said, the British Army write really good doctrine. It's a shame they don't read it. And I think that we are we can, because we are a large organisation, that we can readily sort of miss out some of that and forget some of the lessons from the past. But I don't think it's because we're deliberately doing it. I think it's, everybody's very busy, focused on the next big thing, and we are an organisation in demand, and so it's making the time and for that kind of reflection. I think it's a real effort, and if there's one thing I do have learned from the current CGS and the previous CGS. So you
should tell people who that is. By what?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So if I've learned anything from the Chief of the General Staff, Mark Conn-Smith, or his predecessor, Nick Carter, is those two generals do put in time in their diaries to just think, reflect, read, consider. And so they don't fill their diaries with back-to-back meetings, because otherwise they're missing the point of their role. It's, they've got staff to manage stuff, but they need to be able to have the freedom and maneuver to think. And you've got to deliberately, I think, put that in your diaries. Otherwise you miss out on things.
I mean, many other organisations at the moment are sort of wrestling with an extraordinary pace of change. Societal change, technological change, potentially environmental change. Is the army as well struggling with some of those things, or at least seeing and facing into some of those things?
I think the army's pretty far forward looking at, as the Ministry of Defence and other our colleagues in the other services are also doing. We're continually looking forward to where the future threats are, so our procurement programme can develop the capabilities to be able to meet those threats. I mean, we're as in the recent RUSI speech by the Chief of the General Defence Staff, General Nick Carter, he visualises, unmanned vehicles, a more complex environment, cyber-orientated threats, that kind of thing. So we go, there is an argument we need a slightly different body of the army in order to deal with that. So yeah, there is that future casting, but we also work within a fiscal envelope as well, like everyone else does in the public servants. So we so our ambition still needs to be enveloped as well in terms of cost and time.
That's certainly true of us all. So the armies, I guess, we would stereotype it, probably, maybe unfairly, as a very masculine place. Certainly, that's been that has been the case until relatively recent history. Do you think the role of women has changed? Role of women in the army has changed while you have been in the army, and how do you see that will both predict and hope that will evolve in the, let's say, near future?
Yeah. So when I joined the army in 1992, we just come out of a policy where if you were engaged to be married, you had to leave. When I joined, if you were pregnant, you had to leave as well. And it wasn't until let me think, it was 20 years ago. So what's that? 2001, that we changed the rules on homosexuality and being able to serve. So the policies have, I think, largely complemented broader societal changes. And in some cases, we've been on the front foot. So if you look at our approach to paternity leave and maternity leave, flexible working, those kind of things, it's so much better. But specifically with your question on the role of women in the army, we had, again, in, I think it's 2017, lifted the constraint on only certain roles being available to women. So now females, along with our male friends, can serve in every aspect of the army, including special forces as well. So there's no roles that are barred. Our pay is the same. Maternity and paternity are viewed through the same lens. There's been a huge change in the quarter of a century that I've experienced, over a quarter of a century of service.
And how many? What is the percentage of men to women at the moment?
Well, there's 11% women in the army. That's the statistic that will be quoted. The army is looking at raising. It has got various levels of ambition over the next few years to improve that percentage. So we're looking at 15% in 2030. I personally think we need to raise our levels of ambition, because that will be the catalyst for change. But the point is it's heading in the right direction. So
what do you think of the barriers to women choosing and being selected first and foremost?
From my experience, it's because it's not perceived as a traditional role for a female. That's what it's not even on their radar as an option. So when I was going through school, it absolutely wasn't on the radar. So it just didn't even, it wasn't even a conversation to have. And there was no reference point. I don't come from a military background, so it just wasn't in my, it's just nothing that I thought of, really, and that would be the same for a lot of other females that I was at school with. But and it's quite interesting. I think there's still that perception there a little bit, so that stops people or prevents people. The number of people I had contacting me after Desert Island Discs, saying, gosh, that's not what I thought the army was about, or I wasn't expecting that, or you don't sound as though you're in the army. Those conversations was amazing. I mean, it's literally hundreds of people came back with that feedback. And so I think the army has a bit of work to do to dispel a few myths. And I don't think we're complacent that we've got it right, but we are striving to take down those barriers. And I certainly make myself available for anybody for a conversation, no matter who they are, where they come from, to have that, give people that confidence and also tell them the ground truth of what's really happening.
I mean, without putting undue pressure on you, I mean, you've got such a powerful role to play in that, right? Because you can demonstrate that not only does the army want women to come and join, but you can come and have a fantastic career.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I've had, knocking on the doors of 29 years. I don't come from, I come from a comprehensive school. I come from a rural village. I no military background, and I'm still here as a full colonel. So you can definitely do it. And I had such a blast on the way, doing all sorts of things, and as well as obviously doing the professional side of serving your country on operations and being part of the training and how important that is, but also all the other fun stuff you do, adventure training, skiing, skydiving, diving, marathons, endurance runs. It's just awesome. There's so many different things you can do, and all of it is about developing the individual.
And have you ever felt that you've been treated differently because you're a woman, either by the people that you report to or the people that report to you?
I think I have been, but it's meant in the right way, if that makes sense. So I was, when I was appointed to be the officer commanding a 47 Air Dispatch Squadron in Lynham, as it was then, I was taken aside by the appointer, who said, are you sure you're going to be okay? Because there haven't been any women that's done this before, and there isn't any women in the squadron, and it might be a bit tricky, and etc. So, and I just said, no, absolutely. I've tried 3 times to go here, and now this is brilliant. I'm delighted. But I knew that there was that skepticism there. So I had my first. It's a sort of an association dinner, and I had the team in front of me from the who'd previously served in the unit, and they literally they were all men as well, and they all had their arms crossed in front of them, and I could just see in front of me all these sort of need to be convinced faces. And so I said, I had to stand up and do a bit of a state of the nation on what the squadron was doing. And I said, don't worry, gentlemen, I haven't painted the walls pink, and there's no pictures of fluffy kittens. The team, the guys are all right, and nothing's broken. And so I had to have that kind of conversation. And now a lot of that cohort, because they saw that I could deliver against what they wanted, because they were just passionate about the squadron, because they cared about it and they want it to be in good hands. And it was unusual and a bit of novelty. And I think I proved my worth, I suppose, in the 2 years that I was there.
I mean, I think that, I guess, any new leader, ultimately, man or woman, has to do that, right? I mean, that if you do that, then you'll succeed. Prove that you're up to the job. And I think being the new person standing at the front of a group of people with their arms folded, go, come on, then what have you got? Is always, I think, a challenging moment for any new leader, right? So, and I guess even more so in your position.
No, absolutely. But I think actions speak louder than words. So by putting in some of the things that I did at the squadron, families days, more engagement with the spouses who didn't really even understand what some of their their husbands were doing, and getting the children more understanding what dad does as well was quite helpful. So when we were deployed a lot, and there was a lot of time away for the soldiers in Afghanistan in particular, when things got tricky, you had that dialogue and that trust with the other part of the army family, which is the families themselves and their loved ones. So you're not just managing a person; you're linked into a broader church.
And how important is it in any context, really, to call out bad behaviour when you see it, however you define bad behaviour, or speak truth to power or to your peers? I mean,
it's probably the single most important thing that we need to do as senior leaders in the army, and to empower the troops to do that as well. I have a mindset personally where I'm open to feedback and criticism on a personal level, and I welcome it. that doesn't happen across the board, but it's happening more and more. And the reason I think it's so important is that a lot of our behaviour is learned over the years, and you can get into bad habits, microaggressive language, and you don't even mean it. And I think majority of the time, 99% of the time, the moments where I've called something out or I've said, hang on a minute, is it's not being deliberate. It's just people are not thinking. So what you're doing by calling it out is you're raising it into their consciousness. And you're also championing perhaps people who don't feel they have a voice. So you might step in if you see someone being treated differently in the workplace, and you just say, hang on a minute, or can I have a quick word? Or, that bystander training, bystander moment. So I think it's the single most important thing we can do is to raise in the consciousness where people are maybe not getting it right, or they are unaware of how their behavior or language is manifested to somebody receiving it.
Yeah. And
so for example, I was made aware of a meme that was going around on a WhatsApp group on a course that I was running. And it's something known as the boyfriend meme. It's pretty innocuous, but it's pretty rubbish and pretty sexist from my point of view. It's one person, looking at another person in a derogatory way with silly comments on everything else. But this was a relatively senior course, and I said, do you think that I brought them all together and I said, I don't, you might not think that that's funny, you might not think that that's offensive at all, but I'm telling you now that it probably is, noting that there's only about 25 women out of 200 in this audience. Just think about your actions when you're pressing the distribution button. And also you're going to be having to deal with this kind of thing in your units possibly. So you need to understand where your own red line is so that you can address any problems that come your way. And interestingly, I got a bit of a hard time for doing that from some of my colleagues until one of them went home and showed it to his wife, who said, don't you bring any of that misogynistic stuff in my house. And he said, oh, didn't realise. And he apologized to me the next day.
Right.
So you've got it can be one of the most difficult things to do, because it takes a leap of courage and faith. And my whole, internally, I was really nervous about doing that, because I knew it wouldn't compute with some people. So I had to take a bit of a leap of faith, and I'm glad I did. I'd have regretted it.
I think it takes real courage to do things like that. And I also think,
sorry, Chris, the mic's gone. I can't hear you.
Oh.
Let me just see if I can do that. So I'll have to.
Am I back? I can hear you okay. Can you hear me yet? Oh, I can't hear you at all now.
Hi, Lucy. Do you want to take off your headphones and just remove it and see if
I don't think she can hear us at all at the moment.
I'll try and chat.
Try unplug the headphones. Oh, you're back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got you.
Is that better?
Can you hear the computer or the headphones?
I don't know what's happening. I think I'm going to take that out. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Can you hear us?
Is that okay?
Can you hear us? Yeah.
I can hear you
Oh.
Right. So, hang on a moment. Try one more time.
I can hear you okay at the moment.
We'll just remove it completely if it doesn't work, but we'll try one more time.
Is that okay now?
No, we can't hear you very well now. I think it might be best to just remove it completely so we can finish the end. So
yeah, we'll finish up now.
Okay, hang on. I'll just go into the.
We can hear you and hear us. Yeah,
I can hear you very clearly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So For you don't have to answer. I'll just pick up where I was as a follow up to that question.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think situations like that do take real courage to do, Lucy. And one of the things you talked about at the start was about the importance of building teams. And I think one of the things that defines whether those are, teams obviously can be sometimes very large. One of the things that defines teams for me is the culture. I mean, that's really, the defining experience of any organization is the culture. And I think two things on what the story you just told. First is, I think it's about setting a culture. About the only way you can create the culture you want is if you actually, when you see people diverting from it, you speak up. But also, I think you as the leader, or you as a leader in that situation, your behavior is the most important thing in order to set the culture that you want going forwards, I think.
100%. And culture is a really interesting thing, because we talk about having a cultural change, or wanting to adjust the culture. It doesn't happen overnight, because you're having to change some heuristics and some inbuilt biases that have been there for years and years and years in some of the people. So it's quite effortful, and it takes a lot of work. You can't just expect, do a PowerPoint and do some online training and expect it to happen. It just doesn't work like that.
Well, no, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Culture has nothing to do with PowerPoints, that's for sure. I think culture has everything to do with behaviors, and first and foremost, behaviors of the leader or the leaders.
Well, it's interesting, because I was going to say, Chris, that part of that leadership doctrine that I was talking about earlier, one key bit in the, I talked about what leaders are, what leaders know, competency, what they do, balancing individuals, task, team, but then how they do it. And it's that how they do it that is the new thing that I think the Army has embraced, which is the leadership code. And that is all about behaviours. And a lot of our training is diversity, inclusivity, and behaviours. And in fact, our mandatory training that we do to keep on top of, to make people more aware in the conscious, stand fast what I just said about changing culture, is now known as behaviours. It's not values and standards, it's behaviours. So because values and standards are just a list of words, you've got to live them and be seen to be living them and genuinely believe it in order for them to work. Otherwise, it's just.
I think that I couldn't agree more. I think values. I mean, look, if values for a particular organisation work, great, but I think they're too abstract. They're just lists of words. Whereas I think behaviours are something that I can take, and I can easily understand the things that I should or shouldn't be doing, and encouraging or stopping in others. And I think it's something that's far more understandable, let's say, and also it is the thing that shapes the culture. It's what people actually do, not what they write down.
Exactly. And so what we have a mnemonic and called leaders, LEADERS, because people like me have got to understand it, with my brain cells. And it's easily, you can get it online, Army Leadership Code on a search engine, and you will find the 32-page document which explains what each of these acronyms mean. So about leading by example, encouraging thinking, applying reward and discipline, demanding high performance, encouraging confidence in the team, recognizing individual strengths. They do put weaknesses in there as well, and striving for the goals.
We'll ignore that. We'll pick the bits that suit us.
But that framework can be used to workshop at the low levels, at high levels, because it's, when you're looking at encouraging thinking as a behaviour, what does that feel like to you? And what does that look like to you? And how are you going to change yourself to meet those aspirations?
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much for your time today, Lucy. And come and sort us out at Havas, because we could do with some of your straight talking, no nonsense leadership. So thank you so much, and so wonderful to meet you.
Chris, it's been a delight to have this conversation. I felt so relaxed, and I wish you and your listeners a very safe and happy 2021.